Let's talk about a very positive update on Patrick Mahomes' ankle, the greatness of Travis Kelce, and how the heck he's always open. Then look at an interesting report that surfaced about Frank Clark wanting to return to the Kansas City Chiefs. But first, how about those? Alright, for those of you who have been around for a while, you know a few months ago I started a limited series officially coined Ankle Watch after Mahomes hurt his ankle in the divisional round against the Jags. And the question I got from one of you recently was, hey, how is Patrick Mahomes actually doing right now? Well, by now, most of you know he was able to avoid surgery, and back in April, Mahomes told reporters, I wouldn't say I'm 100%, but I haven't really had any limitations. However, he then said, quote, I think running and cutting there will still be a little bit of limitation for the next few weeks, but I'm happy with where I'm at, and we'll keep pushing it and getting me to the right spot for the beginning of the season. Well, fast forward to this week when he was asked about his ankle in an interview with Shaq and Chuck on TNT, and it seems like everything is pretty much 100% good to go.
How's your ankle?
It's good. It definitely took a lot longer than I expected to heal. But at this point now, I've been able to run around, hit some golf balls, throw the football around, do whatever. And I've been in a good spot. I've actually been working on my jump shot too, so I'm going to have to show you all that at some point.
So this short answer makes me a bit sad to report to you all that Ankle Watch may soon officially be coming to a close, which is honestly great news as that means QB1 is now good to go. And before we move on, there was another funny part of this interview that I found worth sharing, and it was about Travis Kelce always being open.
Why in the hell is Travis Kelce always open?
It's because he never runs the actual route that Coach Reed calls.
Now, while I think that answer was a bit tongue-in-cheek, Patrick answers a bit more seriously later, yet still basically reaches the same conclusion. Travis Kelce often does what he wants, when he wants out on the field, because sooner rather than later, doing that gets him open.
I think it's just that chemistry that we have on the field. I know where he's going to be at. If you drew Travis's routes during a game, you would have no idea what to call it. He just goes out there and plays football.
He just goes out there and plays football. The greatest tight end and the greatest QB in the game, who are a part of the winningest franchise in recent history, are literally out there playing backyard football, and you gotta love it. And on the subject of Mahomes and Kelce, the live episode of the New Heights podcast that was filmed right before the draft dropped earlier this week on their YouTube channel, featuring appearances from some legends like Tony G, Chad Henne, Mahomes, and more. But I found this segment particularly entertaining when a wife asked the Kelce brothers if they thought a diehard fan like her husband could come in and successfully coach the Chiefs. So Jason asked him a rather technical, challenging football question, and his response is absolutely perfect.
3rd and 7, we got split double A. Six-man protection. They run 4 to a side. What's your call? What are you going with?
Just give the ball to Pat and get it over.
He's a genius! That's not a bad game plan right there.
Just give the ball to Pat and get it over to Travis. It's so funny because it is true. Mahomes sometimes just goes out there looking for Kelce, and that is the game plan, especially if Kelce is not double covered and he's one-on-one. But seriously, who better to give a more detailed explanation of why Travis is really so great at what he does than the legend himself, Tony Gonzalez?
I look at a guy who obviously catches the ball with his hands, get up the field after he catches the football, is a mismatch no matter what, where anytime he's on the field, you put a linebacker on him, he's going to beat him. You put a DB on him, he's going to beat him. He's going to beat the double team. How to sit in the zone, just a smart football player. And by the way, I'm describing you. That's what you do better than anybody in the league, honestly.
And then Christian Martinez, who is a sports editor for Rue News at UMKC, dropped a bit of a bombshell on Twitter late Thursday afternoon when he said, quote, Frank Clark is looking to get a deal done with the Kansas City Chiefs per source. Clark may stay in Kansas City after all. And I know what you're thinking when I said the name Christian Martinez.
Who the f*** is that guy?
And being skeptical is completely fine, especially since the news wasn't dropped from an official beat reporter of the Chiefs or an NFL insider like Rappaport, Pelissero, Field Yates, etc. However, Christian is a student at UMKC pursuing a journalism degree, and he's someone who I believe wouldn't risk his credibility this early on in his career over a nothing burger, for one. And two, I actually DM'd him about this to inquire more, and while I won't disclose the exact details because they aren't fully mine to share, I will say this. His source is solid, meaning who he heard this from is, come here, very close to Frank the Shark Clark. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean Frank Clark is 1,000% signing back with the Chiefs, but it does mean that Clark is in some sort of talks with KC about a return because he wants to come back. So even though both sides may be in discussions of some sort, it doesn't mean a deal is going to get worked out when everything is said and done. But it is exciting to see that there's interest, at least from Frank's camp, about a return to KC, which would be perfect for the defensive line in my opinion. Frank really took Karlaftis under his wing last offseason, and I believe he would do the same with Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Plus, he would work in as a nice rotational piece and as someone who is not only great against the run, but really shows his up all the way in the postseason. He is also someone who is chasing greatness as far as postseason legacy is concerned. Not only is he a two-time Super Bowl champion, but he also has the third most postseason sacks in NFL history with 13.5, only behind Bruce Smith, who has 14.5, and Willie McGinnis, who has 16. So aside from chasing postseason greatness, which could be the main biggest reason, why else would Frank Clark want to come back to Kansas City? Well, there's probably a couple more. For starters, maybe he never wanted to leave in the first place. It's where he's been the last 4 years. He has a great relationship with Chris Jones and others, and was very emotional after the Super Bowl win because I think he knew his time in KC could be up. Another reason why is because his market and free agency may not be as competitive as he would have liked. So if he isn't going to get a bunch of money from another team to go somewhere else, why not get paid to come back and run it with Chris Jones and the Kansas City Chiefs? It's also worth mentioning that just because Frank wants to return doesn't mean KC feels the same way. I mean, sure, I think there was a great relationship there with Frank and Chris Jones, Patrick Mahomes, the rest of the defensive line, and Andy Reid especially. But at the end of the day, this is a business, a cutthroat one at that. And, not long ago, Tyrann Mathieu reportedly wanted to return to KC, but the Chiefs moved on and signed Justin Reid rather quickly in free agency, leaving Tyrann a bit hurt, yet with no real choice but to move on himself. And this happens all the time. Tyrann is not the only example here, and this literally happens every season with every single NFL team. So the question is, do the Chiefs also want Frank Clark back? I would think they would at least be willing to have the conversation, but it's hard to really tell what they will decide to do here because you would think that both sides could have worked something out the first time before his release when the Chiefs opted to save $21 million and eat $7.6 million in dead cap back in March. So if Frank is really wanting to return, it's definitely going to be for a steep pay cut considering that fact. And on top of that, the Chiefs will more than likely need to free up some additional cap space to even make it happen, which would more than likely be from a Chris Jones extension. And that makes sense to me. Chris Jones has been asking for a Frank Clark return like every single day on Twitter, and if he wants it to happen that badly, maybe he will leave a little bit extra on the table for Frank Clark, like Mahomes left a little bit extra for Chris Jones when he got his extension done a couple years ago. And that's not even to mention the whole DeAndre Hopkins situation that blew up yesterday on Twitter and everywhere, basically, because if you didn't know, he was released by the Cardinals and is now free to sign with any team that he wants. And it was reported by Albert Breer that the Chiefs received permission to talk to DHop earlier in the offseason and spoke to him before the draft, but the contract was the hurdle, and to do it now, price would have to come way down. KC likes him, but the deal they gave Donovan Smith makes money tough. So the Chiefs certainly have interesting decisions to make, and the fact that they inquired about DeAndre Hopkins before the draft makes this even more interesting. There's only so much money to go around, and that is the question here. Do they want a Frank Clark return like Chris Jones has been asking for, or do they deem the wide receiver room more important and opt to bring in DeAndre Hopkins, even though he's going to be way more expensive than Frank Clark? I mean, in a perfect world, they free up enough cap space to do both, but that is rather unlikely, unfortunately. And that's where I want to get your thoughts on this situation. Do you want to see a Frank Clark return? Seems like he wants it, but do the Chiefs? And if you had to choose, would you bring back Frank Clark or sign DeAndre Hopkins? Let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?